from my perspective, it's a social trend that is leading to legalization. There's been significant amount of movement from the private sector, not necessarily from government, but from the private sector, insisting on legalization. So as with anything else in our country, you know, we're a democratic nation, and people are the ones who dictate, eventually through their policymakers and through their lawmakers, dictate policy for the nation. So when you have an overwhelming amount of the citizenry throughout the country in favor of legalization, then it's somewhat inevitable that it will happen. It's not something that is going to be a surprise to folks. I mean, obviously, we're making headway in terms of the people who are interested in legalization, taking small steps towards that end. Marijuana, medicinal marijuana being one of them. So as we go into the future, more and more breaking of the ice is going to occur, and then the laws will catch up behind that. So my proposal was that we prepare ahead of time so that we can have some model laws in place for what I believe to be the eventuality of legalization of marijuana for personal use. I'm talking about personal use. Now the obvious next step beyond that is the commercialization of marijuana as a product. So that entails a number of civil and international legal issues that need to be considered. And I think it's important that we prepare for that, because even now we have a fight going on between Mexico and the United States over the importation of tomatoes. The Mexican ambassador to the United States in Washington, D.C. is bringing that issue before the, I think, Department of Commerce. So those kinds of things, you know, if we're already having debates about vegetables, certainly marijuana could someday be one of those issues that's under contention for importation.
You know, legalizing marijuana would not end the underground market for a couple of reasons. First, we would still need a black market if we legalized marijuana, unless we were prepared to legalize it for kids. So now the black market under legalization would be focused specifically on kids, as opposed to on the general population. So there would still be a black market. Secondly, if legalization happens, there would be a great reduction in the price. There's no doubt about it, and leading to increasing consumption. But people think that because the prices decrease, then you'll be able to cut out the black market, because the black market can't make any more money. Well, most proposals I've seen call for a major tax on marijuana to, for example, in Washington State, pay for prevention and treatment. There are a couple flaws with that. First is, even if it was taxed, you would still need a black market, because that would undercut the tax. And that's why we have a thriving black market today for cigarettes in places where cigarettes are taxed in any appreciable manner. So in the Bronx, for example, 2/3 of the cigarettes smoked in the Bronx are bought on the gray or black market by people who buy the cigarettes from the South and drive them up in a U-Haul, sell them to a retailer, and then that retailer sells them illegally. So, the idea that this black market's going to go away doesn't make sense. Finally, we know that the networks, the underground market, the cartels and the others are so sophisticated. The idea that they are going to lose all the ground that they've made and pick up and go home and not stay there. Of course, they make most of their money from non-marijuana anyway, so they're still going to be around because they make most of their money from other drugs and also from other problems like human trafficking or violence, kidnapping, etc. So there are multiple reasons why, while the black market might be reduced, it certainly wouldn't be eliminated. And there are certain pockets, like targeting kids, where the black market would thrive. And the reason why we would see that is because they're not just going to pack up their bags and go away. They've spent way too much time and energy and money into establishing the networks they have. So I'm not convinced that the black market is going to go away, even under legalization. It might be reduced, but then we have to figure out the other trade-offs, the increased consumption and increased addiction that we'll get as a result of the price being lower and more use happening.
Approximately 100 million people have used marijuana in this country. 28 million will use it this year. It won't make them dangerous. It won't make them more interesting. It shouldn't make them criminal. In Texas, laws vary among the states, but in Texas, using marijuana is subject to it's a Class B misdemeanor and is subject to 180 days in jail and a $2,000 fine. Most people won't get that, but what they will get is a permanent record. It can knock kids out of the band or the football team. It can move people out of public housing. It can cause college students to lose their loans. It can do a number of other things, but the main thing it does is to leave a record that you always have to check for the rest of your life. It's going to make it difficult to get a job. Texas should develop a system where we would control the distribution, the production quality, the distribution, the sale, and the taxation, which would bring in millions of dollars in taxation and would also save millions of dollars in law enforcement. Since we are situated on the border next to Mexico, which is the primary conduit, we are a primary conduit for illegal drugs, we would cut down on the profits of the brutal criminal cartels in Mexico. It wouldn't weaken them. Prohibition has already made them too strong for that. It wouldn't destroy them. Prohibition has already made them too strong for that, but it would weaken them. Marijuana is sufficiently profitable for them that they're willing to murder for it. California nearly legalized marijuana. This year, it looks as if Washington State definitely will. If that happens, we can just write it off as left coast looniness and then let it drift across the country as it would, and in the meantime, billions of dollars would have been spent, lives would have been ruined. But if Texas, with its independent spirit and conservative mien, were to legalize marijuana in a carefully regulated system, the world would take notice, and great and sweeping change would sweep across the country.
Well, when we're talking about any kind of substance that we ingest for mind-altering purposes, two things that you want to take a look at. You want to take a look at levels of addiction and the levels of harm that a particular substance can do to your body. Right now, marijuana is classified as a Schedule I drug, meaning that it has very, very high potential for abuse and very high potential for addiction, and also no use whatsoever for medicinal purposes. However, you take a look at alcohol and tobacco, and alcohol is considerably more addictive than marijuana. Marijuana has what they call a capture rate of 1 in 10, meaning 1 in 10 people who use it will become addicted, whereas alcohol is about 1 in 6, and cigarettes is about 1 in 4. There are numerous chemical additives in cigarettes that can cause cancer. We know that it causes lung cancer, emphysema, and all sorts of other illnesses. There are carcinogens in marijuana cigarettes as well, but there haven't been enough studies done to see if there could be a direct link between smoking marijuana and causing any kind of cancer, probably because most people who smoke cigarettes smoke them several times a day, whereas most people who smoke marijuana only smoke a marijuana cigarette maybe once a week, once a month on average. So, coming from a scientific perspective, looking at taking potential harms and potential addictiveness, when you compare the three, alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana, then clearly marijuana is less addictive, less harmful to the body than alcohol or tobacco, yet alcohol and tobacco are both legal and regulated. So it's just something to further study, take a look at, and have more transparent academic and government-funded studies done to see if that really is the case.
Legalizing marijuana takes us down a very slippery slope. Marijuana is recognized as a gateway drug, particularly for teenagers and preteens. We have already seen an increase in consumption because of the concerted effort to lessen the stigma against marijuana use. But that's not the only issue. The issue, besides the use itself, is its effect on teens and preteens and their brains. It actually prevents the full development of the brain. Then, to go on, it provides a whole host of legal issues that have yet to be answered. For example, what do you do with workers that arrive to work under the influence of marijuana? Those states where it's legal are still grappling with these issues. The states where it's legal allow for medical marijuana, but it has already been clearly seen that many more people apply and receive a medical marijuana card than actually have the medical marijuana need. Often the marijuana arguments are based upon the premise that there is no harm to the individual, when in fact there is. It is also based upon a premise that somehow it will lessen violence in Mexico and other parts of the United States, and that is clearly not the case either. Those organized mafia-type groups receive a tremendous amount of profit from things other than marijuana. So what is the point? Who wants marijuana legalized? There are many different thoughts about this. Some believe it's those who want to legitimize ill-gotten gains. Others feel that it is individuals trying to justify their consumption. And we can go on, and there are a host of other issues, including foreign governments that may be wanting to get into the business of growing marijuana as a cash crop. Nonetheless, it will provide a slippery slope that is not good for our nation and society as a whole.
The first thing we've learned about regulations is that they need to be viable. They can't be too restrictive. And also, another important lesson is that medical cannabis actors should be given a seat at the table. Their input is valuable, and it shouldn't be disregarded. Through commissions and task force, medical cannabis actors can give their valuable input and help to shape regulations that work for everybody's benefit. Thirdly, regulations can balance the interests of communities, city officials, and cannabis consumers alike. Through proper zoning and sensible hours, the interests of the community are preserved. Through regulations can also provide clarity for law enforcement around this area that often creates a legal gray area. For cannabis consumers, regulations can ensure safe handling of medical cannabis-based edibles and also pesticide and toxin-free medicines for whole plant cannabis. Another important thing that we've learned is that a well-regulated cannabis industry can provide good jobs with benefits and living wages. And also, cannabis regulations can help to protect the environment by ensuring that cannabis is produced or cultivated in a way that is not environmentally harmful, both in rural areas and in cities. Another important thing that we've learned is that regulations can lead to the generation of tax revenue. In California, both state sales tax and local business taxes that have been implemented in some municipalities, including Oakland, Berkeley, and Los Angeles more recently, allow for the generation of important tax revenue, especially in this cash-strapped economy.
I think that marijuana policy should be defederalized because, first of all, we know that after 40 years of the war on drugs, the federal government has simply failed to reduce consumption of marijuana, to prevent kids from getting access to marijuana, and to prevent trafficking of marijuana from Mexico, Canada, and now even cultivation within the United States. By all measures, the federalization of marijuana laws has been a failure. It is time to devolve the regulation of the marijuana market, because it is a market, even though it is a black market, to the states. The states are much more flexible in the kinds of policies that they can implement. They can experiment with different schemes in policy. They can experiment with different distribution networks, with different taxation schemes. They can experiment with different access to the drug. They can regulate it, whether it's medical, whether it's recreational. They can implement policies that are similar to alcohol and tobacco. They can tax it, and they can figure out where the revenue is going to go, possibly to the education system itself and the law enforcement system itself. And thus, I think the states provide 50 great public policy laboratories that eventually will come up with the best policies. We have to be cautious about defederalization, complete defederalization of the marijuana laws. However, we know that the states, in spite of the fact and the advantages that they bring to the table in terms of public policy, we know that they have been quite repressive in the past, and the policies vary widely from the most stringent and oppressive policies to the most liberal policies. But still, I think they can come up with and derive the best policies that we can then refederalize and make it our national policy on marijuana.